Here is the cognitive science philosophy of perception psychedelic wizard, Link Swanson.
One, two, three. These two should go right together now. Hi, I'm Link Swanson. I'm a graduate student in cognitive science and philosophy at the University of Minnesota. I'm interested in how brains distribute semantic meaning across multiple cognitive and perceptual modalities. That's the most generic interest statement that I could find about the sort of core thing that I'm interested in discovering with my work. So the disciplines that I use and I study are cognitive science, philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, history of science, and machine learning. And within those disciplines, or I use all of those disciplines to investigate topics of perception, cognition, self-embodiment and ego, the mind-body problem, consciousness, and psychedelic drug effects. Last March, about a year ago, I published a paper in Frontiers in Pharmacology titled Unifying Theories of Psychedelic Drug Effects, where I sort of tie together information from all of the before-mentioned fields to the topic of psychedelic drugs in general, and in particular reviewing all of the existing theories of how they work. The paper has received a decent amount of attention and press, and it has become more viewed than 99% of all Frontiers articles in all science journals on the Frontiers Journal.
Dang.
I did not expect that. 70,000 views. It helped having Michael Pollan kind of gave it a shout out, and Scientific American also featured it.
Michael Pollan gave your paper a shout out?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, just on his Twitter. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 2 years earlier, I published a paper that's sort of a mixture of history of science and philosophy and neuroscience, called The Predictive Processing Paradigm Has Roots in Kant, and it deals with the sort of historical roots and ideological lineage of the predictive processing theory that's right now very widespread in psychology and neuroscience.
Kant is a philosopher?
Yes. Kant is a philosopher from the 1700s in Germany.
But predictive processing is just something that's emerging.
That's right.
As of late.
That's right. So I sort of trace the idea, the core ideas of predictive processing from today all the way back to Kant. And I mean, people had mentioned that the ideas seem like Kant, but there hasn't been really much explanation of why. And so I happened to be reading Kant and some predictive processing stuff at the same time, and I saw a lot of parallels. So I just decided to take some notes on them, and then it turned into this paper.
Nice.
And I published that in Frontiers in Systems Neuroscience. So that's...
And this might be a stupid question.
Yeah.
Frontiers, is that a pretty big... I don't really know much about what Frontiers is.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open access science publishing platform that publishes papers from, everything from physics to biology, computer. Like there's like dozens and dozens, and I think hundreds of different journals on Frontiers.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a pretty respected.
It is. Yeah. It varies by journal. Like some of the journals are the most cited in their field. And each journal says on the top the impact factor. There's like ways of measuring like the degree of academic respectability or whatever. And yes, so Frontiers journals have a reasonably high degree of academic respectability, whatever that means. I don't really believe that much in impact factor or academic respectability, but
sure,
it's nice to be nice to be able to
Yeah, but I mean,
my work appear in something like that, be accepted by, and then have other people sort of encounter it through that. The legitimacy, like, I'll take it. I love the legitimacy that it brings, but also I don't want to be snobbish about that. So the kind of core question that I'm really interested in is like, how do the drugs produce the experiences? Mm-hmm. We know that it's the drug that produces the experience somehow, because if you don't take the drug, you don't have the experience.
Yeah,
and the drug will consistently create these classes of experiences. I am going to focus on the visual effects, and I don't want to like trivialize any of the other effects. And the visual effects can sometimes be considered like the superficial effects.
Sure.
But I actually think that the visual effects are a good starting point for understanding all effects. Like, I want to get a mechanism of like, what is this drug doing in the brain? And it just so happens that in neuroscience, the visual system is more well understood than a lot of, it's not well understood, but it's better understood than a lot of things. And in fact, it's a common practice to sort of like figure out how it works in the visual system, and then you can kind of extrapolate and apply some of that to other parts of the brain or other facets of experience. And so let's just focus on the visual psychedelic effects. But before we really ask like, how do psychedelics change perception, what I emphasize is that we should ask, well, how does perception work in general? And so I'm going to run through a theory that I mentioned earlier, is predictive processing, also considered Bayesian theories or the Bayesian brain, of how perception works. And so one of the key concepts is what I'm here calling belief, but it's a very specific and term of belief. And basically it just means your internal model of the world. Like, it doesn't have to be like your religious beliefs or like your beliefs about, morality or something. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a lot of times what people think about their beliefs, or do you believe in ghosts? Like, it's like those apply to what I'm talking about, but it's any internal model of the world. Like, do you believe you're sitting on a chair right now? Like,
right.
Like, do you believe
that's air you're breathing?
Yeah. Do you believe you woke up today? Like, those are what beliefs. And a lot of it is like, you don't even know you have these beliefs. Like,
right.
You will never be able to access these beliefs. These beliefs are wired into your brain, and they're like, you can't help but have these beliefs. You can't help but believe that there's space or something like that,
Right.
So in the sort of technical Bayesian sense, it's in the Bayesian statistics, beliefs are probability distributions over unknown states or attributes.
What is
right?
Bayesian?
It's a form of mathematics for estimating the probabilities.
Okay.
So it's like a statistical mathematics that this Thomas Bayes guy in the 1700s sort of came up with this theorem that it's used actually all over the place for machine learning and predictive mechanisms and predicting the weather and predicting, combinations of likelihood, a prior, and it's a way of combining things. So, right? So probability distribution is the key thing about beliefs. It's like beliefs are probability distributions over unknown states or attributes. So that's like the mathematical, statistical sense of beliefs.
Okay.
And I'm mapping that to even just the colloquial, like everyday notion of beliefs. Like, you believe it's the most likely situation that you're sitting on a chair right now. That's like the probability is high that you are sitting on a chair. Like, that's how you believe in it.
Sure.
So my example that I thought of is like, you're in the shower and you've got two identical bottles, one's shampoo, one's conditioner. And you believe that one of these is shampoo, the one on the left, you believe that because it says shampoo in it. So then you just like sort of infer that the other one is the conditioner. And so you can't actually see it, but you have a probability distribution, which is your belief. And the probability distribution kind of gives you this, it's over unknown attributes, right? So the one on the right, it has unknown attributes.
Yeah, because you can't see the
could be mayonnaise in there, like you can't see the front of it, right? So if they were both turned around, you could still believe that one of them's conditioner, but it would be sort of a 50-50, so your probability distribution would be angled in a different way.
Sure.
Now, the way that your probability distribution is focused on something is called the expectation. So where beliefs are the probability distribution over unknown states, expectation is the inverse variance or the most likely value or mean over which the distribution is concentrated. So it's a distribution, so it's like a curve. So like the peak of the curve is like the expectation. Like you most expect the highest probability part of the probability distribution. So that's like your expectation. So in this talk, when I refer to beliefs and expectations, so like I expect that if I grab the one on the right, it's going to be conditioner. That's my expectation, and it's based on my belief that there are shampoo and conditioner, and that since I see the one on the left says shampoo, then I expect the one on the right to be conditioner, and that's just like a very basic thing. So the point, though,
it sounds a lot crazier than it is.
Yeah, right, and it kind of is crazier than it sounds.
Exactly.
At the same time.
Yeah.
But like it applies to all of these things that are like. Even just the simplest thing like that, like you use that and you might use it unconsciously. In fact, if you're in the shower, you might just reach for the one on the right and I'm going to go back to that. You saw the label, but you didn't even think about it. You didn't even think like, oh, it must be this one on the right.
No, exactly. It's just constantly happening in the background.
Right. So there's tons of these micro computations are going on all the time. And the brain just stores these models of the world, and it's executing these computations to arrive at these expectations, and that's just happening all over the place. Mm-hmm. Like from the lowest levels of like each color or pixel of your visual field or your auditory of what I'm saying and whatever, all the way up to like your grand thoughts about like who you are and what the universe is. Like. All of it is based on these internal models of the world and these beliefs, so to speak, that your brain is storing these beliefs, right? And some of them have been wired, right? So some of them actually you were born with, like that they just have evolved, and some of them you developed early,
like they're like epigenetic or something.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really know exactly how they work. I'm not going to really get into exactly the differences between that, but basically it's a whole bunch of prior knowledge. Prior knowledge can be stuff that you've inherited from your genes or knowledge that you've inherited from your prior experience. And so basically you've got belief and prior knowledge and this process of arriving at an expectation based on that prior knowledge and the current evidence. And this shapes how we perceive the world. It actually shapes what you experience. So this is the key thing here. So take a look at that. Now, like this is a Kazina trying.
It's like an optical illusion or something.
Yeah, I mean, what does it look like to you?
A square.
Yeah, so you see a square. There is no square.
Right.
It's 4 Pac-Man guys that are like pointed at each other.
It's 4 circles with like a quarter taken out of each one.
Yeah.
Or not a quarter. A quarter.
Yeah.
And they're all facing sort of like the mouths of Pac-Mans would be facing each other, so it makes like what looks to be a square, but really...
And it's really hard not to see a square.
Yeah.
And it looks like the square is on top of 4 circles. It looks like somebody took a white square and they plopped it on top of 4 circles. Now, when you start to really like analyze it, then you can see the Pac-Man guys. And if you like actually cover some of them up, then it's like obviously this doesn't. Sorry, you don't. I'm covering it up with my hands.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you could do all kinds of things to get it to fade in and fade out. So the point of this is, so your brain, when it sees the square, it makes an inference that the most likely cause of the visual input is a white square occluding black circles. Now, why does it make an inference like that? Why doesn't it make an inference that there's just 4 Pac-Man guys that are just trying to eat each other? Like, well, it's because the occlusion, like one thing occluding another thing, is everywhere in the natural world. Like one leaf is in front of another leaf, and a bark is in front of another bark. And so our brains have sort of evolved and been wired to see, based on all of this evolutionary history and all of our prior experience through childhood and so on, that like the world, the visual scenes of the world, there's layers, right? There's always occlusion. Occlusion is a normal part of it. And so rather than seeing 4 objects that are sort of next to each other, they're all on one 2-dimensional plane, we think of it as a square, a white square on top of them. And so that's one instance where prior experience shapes perception. So here's another instance. Square A and square B. Which one do you think is darker? Which one looks like a darker color? right? So you got A and B.
Well, A looks darker.
A looks darker, right? It clearly looks darker. It is very, very difficult.
Don't tell me that B is darker.
No matter what I do. No, I'm not going to say that B is darker. I'm just going to say they are identical.
What?
They are, and it even looks, you can almost even see a shadow on it. There is no shadow on it. This is the same hex value all the way through, the same actual color value. I'll go back.
Wow.
Now,
that's kind of mind-blowing.
Again, there's prior knowledge. So the knowledge of like how lighting, shape, and shadow works in the natural world is actually dictating that you see a lighter color on B and a darker color on A, even though those colors aren't lighter or darker. So that's like an illusion. People call it an illusion. Mm-hmm. But like, are you hallucinating B? Are you just like, your brain is painting this thing. You're not seeing what's actually the color that's actually there. You're seeing it as your subjective experience is actually giving you two different colors, but they're not. They're exactly the same. Because the context, right? And so context, here's another, like a little, I guess, a higher level, like more conceptual context effect.
Sure.
So now here's a video, and maybe you can link out to this. So let's check this out. This is pretty cool.
The hollow face illusion is one of my all-time favourite optical effects. And we've had an Einstein mask for many years. Now we have one that's fully painted, decorated by an artist. An effect with all the flesh tones and the white hair and so on is remarkable, because it really does look like Einstein himself. But this is a hollow face, don't forget. Here is the piece being turned around very slowly to show that it's hollow that side, and then this side is all in grey. You're not supposed to see this side. Normally it's just the back of the mask.
Whoa.
You keep turning around, and this nice effect here as he suddenly pops out.
It's a very nice effect.
To you, because although it's a hollow face, he's going to suddenly pop in your imagination.
There he is.
Full
Whoa.
face. An effect like that also, which is very remarkable, is when you tilt.
That's wild.
Like that. You get some very, very strange effects.
Totally hollow.
Head tilting upwards and downwards, and the eyes seem to follow you up and down. And now if we just leave the mask on the table and move the camera, you'll get some very interesting.
Look at that, it's popping out.
Dang.
Hollow face illusion.
That's our brains that are doing that. This is not computer generated or anything like that. Well, yeah, it's a very nice effect. Now, if you just take some mushrooms, you get an even more magnificent effect.
Now you bring the synth in.
Yeah. Synthesizer really adds to it, huh? See, now that kind of looks hollow, but then boom, his nose pops out.
That is wild.
Okay, so like why does the face look convex instead of concave or whatever? Like, why is the face not hollow for us? Why do we hallucinate this face that's popping out? So, like, one explanation is that our beliefs, so to speak, are that faces aren't hollow.
Right.
So we're wired to see faces like really strongly. The visual system is very strongly built for faces because it like helps us as primates. Mm-hmm. And so if we see facial shapes, immediately our brains just construct a face for us, right? So even if it's not actually a face that pops out, all of a sudden Einstein's nose is popping out at you when it's hollow.
Yeah.
And you can get that effect with any hollow mask. Like, it doesn't have to be painted like that. Like, it's pretty intense. And so there's something about the way that prior knowledge and prior belief and expectation shapes our experience in real time. The guy's shifting the mask, and then there's at one point, the hollowness pops out at us because we can kind of see the side of the mask, like when he turned it. And then you're like, oh, it's hollow, because no longer do you have that strong prior telling you that it's a face, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's now the evidence changes and it becomes a different expectation. See anything here?
Not really. I mean, this kind of reminds me of like somebody's head, but...
Okay. How about if I say, I'm going to try to change your experience right now just by giving you information.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to give you a new belief. You believe that that's a cow, where there's a nose, and then there's some ears.
Oh, yeah.
And its body.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Now you see a cow.
100%.
Okay, now we go back here. What do you see?
A cow.
A freaking cow. Now, you can't look at this thing and not see a cow, right? Now, that's an instance where I actually changed your beliefs. Now you have new beliefs, and those are influencing
That's
what
interesting.
you see. We're not using the hardwired beliefs. We're using new beliefs that I just instilled on you, and that's changing your perception. It changes the
and
whole.
It's pretty persistent.
The whole gestalt of what. Yeah. So here's one. Auditory one.
Okay.
Did you hear anything?
The first time it just sounded like crazy squiggles. The second time it sounded like there was words, but I didn't make
word?
any. I didn't make any out.
Okay. So that whatever you did there, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You'll never be able to say that again.
The man read the newspaper at lunchtime.
Okay, now we're gonna listen to it again.
Oh my God! No, it's so obvious.
Sine wave. So you're an audio engineer, so you know sine wave. So that's all you do is just take the sine wave and you play the sine wave, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because there's not enough contextual information. But you get a new belief by hearing the real one. Now you've got all this priors and all this contextual information. Your brain immediately recruits to give you a perception of that sine wave that has meaning in it.
I feel like even though people listening to the podcast couldn't see the visual ones unless they go online, just hearing that audio one gives you a perfect example of all the rest of them. It's the same concept.
Yeah, that's perfect. We got another one here. I'm gonna see if I can. I'm gonna go out to a browser for this one. Okay, so here's. Oh God! What the hell? Okay.
Something about lice.
Right. Let's see. I have to. All right, and then here's the original.
She cut with her knife.
Oh.
Okay, so now you got the belief. Okay.
Dang.
All right, so we're going to do a couple more because this is good. What the fuck was that? Okay, so, it's pretty incomprehensible.
These are great.
They're buying some bread.
They're buying some bread. Okay, so now let's see if we can hear that buying. Oh yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. So this there's interesting. I'm gonna do another one here, and then I'll do a spiel about it.
Yep.
What?
I got nothing. Skirt.
Ooh.
She's wearing a skirt.
She ironed her skirt.
Yeah, you got that one, huh?
Though.
You're astute with okay, let's go back and listen to it again. So hear it. Yeah. And now these priors stick with you. If you go back and visit this page like a year from now, this is what I did today because I did the presentation with this stuff in it like a year ago. And I visited them today and I listened to the sine wave ones and I got almost all of them right away. And I had forgotten all about what they said. Conceptually I'd forgotten about what they said, but somewhere my brain has just filed away all this prior information and kept it as this little perceptual belief. And it uses that to interpret what's coming in.
Yeah, because that classic optical illusion of the old man one way, or the old woman one way, and then you flip it, and it's like a young woman the other way.
Yeah,
it's like you see that when you're young, and then it's just like you remember it.
And that doesn't work on you.
Yeah,
anymore.
It doesn't work anymore.
Right, and so that all fits with the overall theory of a predictive processing view of perception, basically that your perception, you're not just perceiving stuff that's in the world like you're taking a picture with a camera. It's not just unmediated, right? We saw with the sine wave speech just now. The question is when you get the sine wave verse, and you're like, what was that? And then you get another one, it's like, she cuts with a knife, and then you hear it again. It's like she cuts with a knife. Then when you go back and hear it again, are you hallucinating something that you didn't hear before? Are you picking up on something that wasn't there? Did the non-sine wave version, the clear version, did that prime you in a way? And what is the priming mechanism? And what I'm saying, the point I'm illustrating is that it actually gives you information that you use next time, or the next time you hear things, you're using that and you interpret it, and it makes a perception for you. You experience a perception new that you didn't have before. How does this relate to psychedelic drugs then? Like, what is my point with all this? So my key hypothesis is that if the brain has these core mechanisms that is constantly deploying these beliefs, it's constantly applying prior knowledge and creating expectation and interpreting all incoming information in terms of these expectations and prior beliefs, then a lot of psychedelic effects, a lot of them, if not all of them, can be explained or made sense of, at least, in terms of the thought that they're a destabilization of these key processes that make belief, expectation, prior knowledge, and then also beliefs about beliefs. There's like these sort of meta beliefs that your brain is this network of beliefs, and it creates these internal models of the world. So really what I mean is that the brain doesn't just store a static pile of beliefs. It's a hierarchical structure of beliefs nested within beliefs, nested within beliefs. And so psychedelics seem to disrupt all of this, where the settling on what the probability distribution of which belief to choose, that settling process is like fluid, or it's like disrupted in a way. So when you think about morphing kinds of looking at an object and having it morph into different things, it's like, you know how bistable images, like you said, the old man and the young woman, bistable image, or right now I'm showing a bunch of morphing statues that are morphing into each other. So psychedelic effects might morph in that way because the beliefs are constantly changing. The drug somehow changes the brain's ability to settle on a single belief, and it's shifting in all these different ones, and it might actually deconstrain or lift constraints that were settling on a single belief about the world. That internal model of the world is now opened up and very fluid and very like unable to really settle. And in visual domain, you get basically just trippy shroom visuals or whatever. Like that's the manifestation of that. But then if you think of these beliefs as being like universal in the brain, then you also get like merging with the universe, because in your normal state, you believe that you're separate from the universe, or that you're in here and the universe is out there. But then when those beliefs start to get shaken up, you get things like ego dissolution, or you get things like where you feel like you're melting or you're absorbing with your surroundings, or and you also get things like where you start to question your previous habits, you start to question your beliefs in a very conscious way.
Yeah.
And so the hypothesis also is that psychedelics are therapeutic tools because they can destabilize these things, right? And so destabilizing belief in this specialized way of thinking about it and expectation is a useful tool for personal development.
Because you can like be holding on to all sorts of self-defeating or negative beliefs about yourself and the world around you that you're not really even conscious of. It's just a pattern of like believing that everything always goes bad. Or once you when things are too good, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop or whatever.
Right, and it doesn't even have to be a rational or sort of a linguistic kind of idea-based belief. It can be an emotional belief.
Oh, sure.
Like where your emotional self believes that it's going to feel depressed and that it can only feel bad.
Sure.
And each day you wake up and it's just like, it doesn't believe that it can feel different. And so if psychedelics just sort of shake up all your beliefs, including your perceptual beliefs, then that can explain sort of why they're effective in depression and addiction. So you might believe that in order to feel good or fulfilled, you need to drink. You have to drink. That's a core prior belief based on patterns of prior knowledge that you've accumulated and rigidified. So this belief system that our brains have, this neural layers of beliefs, it's not necessarily always good. It's not like it just always works in our favor. It's designed to do this through evolution, and it's just how it is. But it can assume pathological beliefs.
Right. Yeah.
And having a drug that can break up all forms of beliefs, even the perceptual ones that make you see trippy visuals, well, you're seeing trippy visuals, but you're also sort of questioning your own identity, or you're feeling maybe like you don't have an identity, or you're maybe feeling like you don't need to smoke anymore, or whatever it might be. These kinds of anecdotes and actual research that's being done on this. I feel like this is getting at a mechanistic principle. And it can even get at some of the like spiritual breakthroughs and like ego dissolution experiences, because in a spiritual breakthrough, you may feel completely free of all constraints. Mm-hmm. And like this sort of, you get into sort of Eastern kind of non-dual kind of stuff. But if you're breaking down beliefs in this neurochemical way, then can have the potential to get you into a state where you're not feeling constrained, and so you feel at peace with everything, because it's just like there isn't a lot of things to not be peaceful about, because it's just. Mm-hmm. And at the other side of the coin, though, it also kind of explains bad trips, because if you don't have these rigid beliefs to like fall back on about what reality is and what's real and what's not, a lot of times that's a key fear in panic attacks, is like, I don't know what's real, in a depersonalization or derealization.
Yeah, I've experienced it countless times.
And so if you have a molecule that's able to really destabilize beliefs, then all of a sudden you don't have that like solid footing of belief that you usually can just rely on. Mm-hmm. And without it, it can be, there can be a panic, and you start to panic, but it's like you're treading water, or you're like trying to scale up a plastic wall or something, or so like,
yep,
or running on ice or something, where it's like there's nothing to hook into, because your belief system has been not in the traditional sense of belief system, I guess, but like your neural network of beliefs has been
your belief system in terms of what you believe reality is, and what you believe you are, and
right,
how you relate to the world and everything.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna go into the integration piece after a psychedelic experience, say, or part of the explanation for why is there a permanent, because up to now I've talked a lot about the acute effects, like the short-term effect, like, okay, your visuals get skewed, so we can explain that by like saying that it's a disruption of these perceptual beliefs that your brain uses to perceive the world, and it's disrupting them, and so that's why you perceive the world all wonky. But what explains like the long-term changes that you can have after this? And I got this quote here. It says that prior learning makes certain other regularities harder, at times impossible to spot. So prior knowledge is thus always both constraining and enabling. So what I'm saying is that the psychedelics take the constraints off of prior knowledge. And so normally you use prior knowledge to like navigate like your house, like how do you walk down your stairs and how do you get to your car or whatever. And a lot of times in psychedelics, that's hard to do because your prior knowledge has been changed into this fluid sea of whatever. And but the prior knowledge can also be keeping you stuck, whether you're stuck on a problem, like even just in your job, say you're working on a project and you just can't figure it out, and then you take some acid and then the next day suddenly the solution is there. Mm-hmm. After you come down, or a week later or whatever.
Or like even probably everybody's experience when you're really trying to think of the name of somebody or the title of a movie or whatever, mm-hmm. and the harder you try, you can't think of it, but then when you go about your day and you're randomly doing something, it'll pop into your head out of nowhere.
Right. So sometimes the prior knowledge, and I've got this figure here that's like this maze, and there's this person kind of walking through this maze, but there's all these purple things, parts of the maze that they're not quite getting to. So the analogy is that like in a normal state, your prior knowledge keeps you in the orange part of the maze, and in a psychedelic state, or the psychedelics sort of allow you to get out of the orange part of the maze and flow into the purple part. And then there's this nice like cosmic crack in the head at the top where it's like you're out of the maze completely and you're off in the cosmos. I don't know. I think that's kind of a cool sort of visualization. But basically the idea is that like our perception, our emotion, our cognition, our thoughts, our feelings, our narratives, they are very habitual. They're very rigid and they're difficult to change. And psychedelics get at, they are like a pharmacological mechanism that gets at the thing that keeps these prior knowledge systems in place. It shakes that up. And my core question that I want to ask is, how exactly does it do that, right? So I'm vague about that. I don't really know how it does that, but I want to find out. I want to be able to come up on stage and say, or write in a paper and say, this is how it does it. We've found it. This is the way that it does it. This is how it works. And I think that in that process, we'll actually get a lot of information about how the brain works in general, because we don't really know how the brain stores prior knowledge and beliefs. But by watching how it gets shaken up by a psychedelic molecule, we can understand how it does it in the first place.
So why do you think those changes are long-term? Did you have...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you. I didn't go back. So I think that you've got these prior knowledge and beliefs that sort of keep you from the answer. You can't even see the answer because it's excluded by the prior knowledge. And then the prior knowledge and belief system and expectation system gets sort of temporarily disabled by the psychedelic. And then it takes a while for it to kind of come back. The integration is the next day. And you're slowly sort of coming back to your normal self. And then you've got this window of opportunity where your therapist can talk with you, and you can, or if you're not in therapy, you're just sitting by the river thinking about things. You can actually kind of have aha moments more likely, because the things that have blocked the aha moments for you in the past have been temporarily disabled, and you're able to make sort of inroads on the problems. So that's kind of what I think that also explains. The principle that psychedelics disrupt prior beliefs explains how they can change people permanently by having a temporary experience, but then having permanent change based on that. And in general, the biggest point that I have is their usefulness, not just for being interesting experiences, not just for being therapeutic tools or spiritual development tools, but that they can actually help us understand how the brain works, period. And I'm interested in how perception works, full stop. Psychedelics are fascinating, but that's not why I'm interested in psychedelics in particular. One of the main reasons I'm interested in psychedelics is I'm interested in the mind. They just help us understand what the mind is and what it is in a normal state. How does it make the normal state? How does the mind make regular perception? Perturb it with a psychedelic, and you can kind of understand why did it get perturbed that way, and then that can help you learn about the broader system.
Well, I think something that a lot of people who have done psychedelics start to realize, or maybe realize after trying them once, is that the quote-unquote normal state is much more, fantastic and unexplainable than, most people ever realize.
Yeah.
Like, not Terrence, but Dennis McKenna's famous line about how we are drugs, right. And we're always on drugs.
We're bags of drugs.
Yeah. So it's like taking a psychedelic sometimes almost like can just help you see the world in a different way permanently in a way that you realize that reality itself is just ultimately mind-blowing. And
yeah, I think that, and it kind of, that's nice, because that's a nice fit for this scenario. Like, before you took the psychedelic, you kind of had this belief that reality was boring,
right?
And then psychedelic showed you that, like, shook up all your beliefs and shook up reality, and then the psychedelic goes away, but then you're kind of like, well, I can't quite believe that reality is boring anymore because I have new information. Sort of like the sine wave speech. Like, now it doesn't sound like a bunch of blobs anymore. It sounds like, she ironed her skirt or whatever. Like the new information that you get from the psychedelic. That's actually a good point. Now, we should track this because not only do they just shake up your prior beliefs, but they give you new experiences to make new prior beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So that you're actually building new beliefs, not just shaking up the old ones.
Right. Yeah.
And so they allow you to do both.
You're recognizing new patterns in things. And, Yeah.
Yeah. So that's end. That's
the end. Huh?
That's my spiel of my little talk about predictive models of the brain, belief, expectation, and how psychedelic drug effects fit in there. And I really do think that all of the effects psychedelics have can be nicely captured by these principles.
Mm-hmm.
And it also helps to understand how the effects are related to each other. So one way that I came at this early on was I wanted to answer the question, why does a drug that provides trippy visuals also help people climb out of depression?
Right.
Like,
it's a great question.
It's an important question too, because psilocybin is FDA breakthrough status for depression. And this drug is going to get, shit's getting real for psilocybin. Like, this could become a mainstream treatment for,
end-of-life anxiety too, right?
Oh, yeah, end-of-life anxiety and things like that. But the breakthrough status is actually for
depression.
Treatment-resistant depression.
Oh, okay.
Full stop. Just treatment-resistant depression. So, anybody out there with treatment-resistant depression, you think? Yeah, lots of people.
Yes.
And are there effective medications for it? No, because that's why psilocybin got breakthrough status, because breakthrough status means it's a breakthrough compared to all the other treatments. Like, it's vastly more effective than other treatments. So it's still an important question. Why does, my nephew takes mushrooms, goes to raves, and looks at funny lights, but now my doctor told me I should take some for my depression. Like,
right.
What's the connection? And that's, I guess that's
great character.
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but it's like a southern Minnesota guy. Yeah. It's an important question. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in, and just from a neuroscience and psychology perspective, it's like, yeah, what is the connection? And in fact, you can ask, do you need those trippy visuals? Because it might be nice to not have them in your treatment. It might be nice if someone doesn't have a big vision and they can still get over their depression, because, I don't know, maybe you can decouple them. But asking the question, how are they related? Is it the same mechanism? And I think it is absolutely yes. That the drug disrupts the low-level visual system and it messes with the beliefs that the visual system has. These unconscious, pre-conscious, like early vision beliefs that you don't have any control over. You're looking at those squares with the two different colors, and you have no way to make one look darker than the other.
Right.
So and in the similar sense, when you're tripping out of mushrooms and you're staring at the wood grain, you really don't have a way to stop the vision, the wood from moving. Like, you can for a little bit, and then it'll just start moving again. And so the visual system in this very, it just sort of messes with how it settles on what it believes it's seeing, and so on, all the way up in all the hierarchical levels of the brain into higher cognition, sense of self, and even things like politics and society and broader sense of theories of how the world works, right? Because we all have our theory of how the world works. And people who've taken psychedelics report that their theories of how the world works can change after they take psychedelics.
Yeah.
And so my overall point is that what if it's the same neural mechanism and that's doing the visuals, the auditory changes, and the broader conceptual changes and the sense of self changes. And I just think that's powerful. I think that's an important thing to go after, and that's what I am going after.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I think like, when you think about, a lot of people seem to have the similar types of effects from major changes in their lives, like people dying or divorces or, a similar type of process of how their reality seems to break down over a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And then they're forced to kind of like rebuild themselves and remake their reality in a whole new type of way.
I'm glad that you brought that up because one thing that fits in with that list is travel.
Ah, right.
And
taking a trip.
Take a trip, right. So think about this system of beliefs and priors that you're inheriting. Say that you live in a small town, you have a routine, you have the same job, you have the same things that you do every day, you've got the same people in your family, and you're like that same way for like 25 years or more. And then you take a trip, like, say, to Asia, and you experience different food, different colors, different plant life. And it doesn't even have to be, I guess, as drastic as going somewhere way different, but even sometimes when you just go just to a different Midwestern city.
Sure. Yeah.
You go travel in general. And when you're on the trip, you start to kind of reflect on your life. You might even like notice that like foods taste better, even if they're the same food. You're like getting a McDonald's, but you're like at a, you're in China or something. Like, I mean, this is a common experience. Or you might come back from your trip and now you're back at home and like things seem different. Like they look different. It's the same old house. You're in your same old town, but it seems like and then a lot of times people get prompted to make big changes based on this little travel they did. Now, here's the thing. Priors, beliefs, prior knowledge, expectation, they get shook up by having different inputs. Because now you've gone to Asia, you've processed all these different things, and now you've got this wider model of the world. And so your model of the world has been mutated. But you're still applying the model of the world to every situation you get in, even back home. And so you start to question, well, do I even like my job?
Right.
Or like, should I divorce my wife? Or like, like that happens when people travel and things, or, and like you mentioned, having big life circumstances, death or change, or even things like 9/11 or something, some big tragedy or something like that. I shouldn't have said that. I'll probably get all the 9/11 truth debates going. Yeah. But the
9/11 was an inside job.
Yeah.
Debate is over. All right.
Changed. See, lots have changed. Yeah. No, you just got to read the commission report. Then they'll tell you. Belief, expectation.
Right.
Even there. I mean, you can even go into those kinds of things.
So, that gets into super interesting territory of how that this concept is like weaponized.
Well, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The smart propagandists know how to
take that noise and give you implant a belief for you. So every time you hear that noise, you think, oh, that's that.
Yeah. 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 And like have you ever heard of predictive programming?
No, I don't think so.
Not predictive processing, but predictive programming. Now you get into this like rabbit hole of bizarre shit on the internet. So careful when you look this up, kids at home. But there's this technique where you can sort of get these little hints of things in that are like not quite the full concept, and they're not quite conscious, but you're like sneaking in these little hints different places, There's like theories about like Saturday Night Live or different.
Oh yeah,
things,
I have heard. Of this,
get the hint in there,
films and
sort of like prime us, and then when the big thing happens, we'll have a sort of opinion already of it.
So this is one of the big things that I've heard it talked about is like the whole alien phenomena.
Sure,
is like putting certain types of ideas into films or shows about what aliens are, what they're like, how they look.
Right.
To like you said, prime people's idea. But I mean, it's kind of there's definitely stuff like that I'm sure is intentional and happens. But then there's also like we do it to ourselves too. We do it to each other.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like we take our idea of what we think something's like, and then we display it for somebody else, and it primes them, and we're priming each other all the time.
Yeah, and it's sort of a ubiquitous feature in nature in the form of two phenomena in nature: camouflage and mimicry. And so I'm a bull snake.
Yeah.
You're a predator. You're like a hawk or something. Albatross. And you're like, see me and you're like, ew, snake. And I'm like, rattle my tail against some leaves. Bzzz. I'm not poisonous. I'm just a gopher snake, bull snake, whatever. I don't have a rattle. I don't have venom, but I'll rattle my tail against these leaves to make it seem like I'm a rattlesnake, to make you believe that I'm poisonous. And so that entails that the snake needs to have some kind of a model of the predator's beliefs.
Wow.
It's not conscious.
Right.
Well, it could be. We don't know what animals are like.
But it doesn't need to be.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah, exactly. You get an naysayer being like, "Oh, that's not right." Belief. The snake's not thinking that it's trying to trick the. Well,
sure.
Who knows? But same with camouflage. I mean, in order for so if a chameleon changes color to like match the leaves, there's a lot of contextual information there. It has to sort of know that if something looks from that angle, that they're going to see tree bark. So then I'm going to change to be kind of the color of the tree bark. There's also auditory camouflage. The biological term for it is crypsis, and I like that. I like that. Crypsis.
That is cool.
It's like encryption. You're like encrypt, because encryption is also camouflage.
Auditory camouflage? Data. What is that?
Well, I don't remember what animals do it now, but they'll make their own sounds, but like they have to make a sound, but they don't want to trip off predators that it's them, so they'll try to sound like a different animal, or they'll make a sound where it sounds like they're way over there, but they're actually right here.
Sure.
So they need to say I don't even know what animal does this, so I should not. I should just stop talking about this. Yeah, we could look up. We need the guy, like the podcast guy.
Yeah, the producer, Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie.
Pull that up.
Yeah, pull it up, Jamie. Jamie, please pull it up.
That is interesting, though.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is probably in your predictive processing paper. It's kind of in your presentation, but is it an established theory, or is it just something you're working on that basically all of our reality is based on this, like on belief that we never really experience true reality?
Yeah. So that, good question. So there's a guy at UC Irvine. His name's Donald Hoffman, and he has a lot of arguments that actually the true reality, there's no way that you could ever truly represent reality, because a nervous system is always representing reality for its own interests. And in fact, it's better off for that nervous system to represent reality for its own interest than to represent reality as it truly is. And this guy he published this paper. He made this like video, or not video game, but it's like a game theory based computer simulation of agents in an environment. An agent that represents the environment as it truly is actually dies faster than an agent that lies to itself about what's out there, but in a way that's convenient for its own advantages in getting points in the game, or like getting not eaten or whatever. And so, in fact, just like the squares in a lot of these illusions that I showed, so the hollow face illusion, but the squares that are two different colors, they look two different colors, but they're not. So our brains are lying to us, showing color square B as a lighter color.
Right.
But the reason why it's lying to us is because it's advantageous, because of the way that shapes are normally arranged in our environment. That's the way light is, that's the way that the shadows are cast, and that's what colors mean to us. And they mean a certain thing to us. And so this is my overall point, is that it could be that all of our perceptual experience is this big ass lie that our brains is doing. It's a useful, it's advantageous to our own safety and our own, whatever in the environment, but it's not truly representing reality. Now, enter the controversy about DMT reality. The DMT entities. So it could be that DMT entities or DMT reality is the way reality is, that they are all around us all the time.
Right.
Those weird tentacle, like fluorescent,
right,
weird sounding people.
I can't say I do
machine
know
elves or whatever. I don't know. I read about them in a Terrence McKenna book.
My DMT trip was very not elf-like.
Yeah. Well,
it was like a technological, futuristic Buddhist monastery.
Yeah.
But I was just like the Om chant that was happening.
So, but even in that, so it doesn't have to be just DMT, but so part of the controversy though around like, are these
actual
real, and are they actually in your environment?
Right.
And so going back to your question about like, are we just constructing reality based on these beliefs? Is all of our reality constructed based on these convenient beliefs or convenient for us, but it's not actually reflecting true reality? It could be the fact that DMT might alter or remove a certain set of beliefs, allowing another one to emerge that's reflecting reality in a different way, or a truer way, or a less true way. It's hard to,
or like
the epistemology of it, saying what's true and what's not, is actually a very tricky thing. It's very, very, very difficult when you're looking at this thing and it's like, well, it looks like a lighter, box number B looks a lot lighter to me than that. Is it lighter? Well, it's not, because, hey, we can measure it objectively and we can show that they're actually the same color. But, could it be that like your whole life and everything you see is this sort of convenient representation for you, but that doesn't actually reflect what things actually are?
Like maybe a simple way to think about it would be like, if reality was actually just like codes, or like if you look at a website, it has a certain look and you think, well, that's the website. But then you look at the script and you're like, the website is actually just all these weird little scripts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually exactly what this guy that I mentioned, this Donald Hoffman guy, he calls it the user interface theory of perception.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he says that the desktop of a computer is a convenience environment that you experience. You're clicking on windows and you're clicking icons or whatever. That's a convenience environment. That does not represent what's actually happening in the computer. Because when you click the window, it's actually executing some code, and the code executes more code, and it comes down to ones and zeros, and they're not actually ones and zeros. They're actually just like electrons.
But if you had to just type in code all the time to do everything on your computer, obviously it would severely impact its usability. And
Yeah, and if you knew what was really going on your computer, which is like these electrons that are like shuffling back and forth
layer deeper.
At the hardware layer, in the circuit board, there's a bunch of electrons that are being shuffled back and forth, and those are what's actually, providing the information for the ones and zeros, which provides the information for the layer of the whatever, and the layer up and up and up, and then there's this layer of the user interface. And so he makes an analogy that says the user interface, the desktop theory of perception, I think it's the desktop theory or the user interface theory or something like that, but which is that are, you wake up in the morning, you smell, you hear, you see, but that whole perceptual environment that you're in is a convenience user interface to reality that doesn't represent at all what it's like in itself. And now back to Kant. Kant said, we can't know things in themselves, but we can only know their appearances. And that was his big push.
Basically saying the same.
That's what he's known. That was his big push. And that's what he's known for. Now, it's probably not just Kant. I'm sure that there are philosophers in the Western lineage before him that, of course, they played with the same ideas. And then in the Eastern, there's a very sophisticated philosophy around that. I'm not very knowledgeable about it, but I don't want to leave it out because I don't want to just say, oh, Kant was
right.
But like, you got these. Well, in fact, people like this Donald Hoffman, who has this user interface theory of perception. In fact, a lot of his work is very, very, very much just Kant. Like this Kant guy just said all of these things before neuroscience and, in the 1700s. But yeah.
The DMT thing's interesting to me because obviously I'm basing this just off of personal experience. I have no reason to believe that. It's just an idea. But like to me, the computer thing makes a lot of sense. And I see it kind of like, our normal waking reality is like the user interface, like you said, like the desktop or an application or whatever. And it's kind of like an as above, so below situation where like the visuals or possible entities are like the code. It's like the flip side. And then where what you said of the hardware aspect of like the energy running through the circuits, that's like the complete unification. That's like God or soul or whatever you would call it. Just pure energy.
Yeah. It leaves, definitely thinking about perception and reality in this way leaves open for the very real possibility of those kinds of things, those kinds of ideas, and thinking of it in that way. Like, hey, here's a theory of neuroscience and of the brain that actually shows that reality isn't as clear cut as you might think it is, and that basically your beliefs are really constructing a lot. And now, if you think about science itself and the structure of scientific revolution, that idea, Thomas Kuhn in the 60s, he's a philosopher of science. He wrote this book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he showed how, or argued that science progresses in these paradigms where a bunch of scientists have this overarching belief about how reality is, and they operate within that. And then that slowly breaks down because new evidence and things and there's new anomalies, and the anomalies sort of contrast with it. And then you get this like upset of like revolution where like now they don't have a theory because there's new evidence that the theory can't account for, and they have to come up with a new theory, and it just goes on and on and on. And I guess that fits as well with this kind of a paradigm, this predictive processing sort of view. But let's get back to the DMT entities because we want to stay on that. Because we mentioned camouflage. Have you ever seen Predator?
Yeah, I have. Not for quite a while, but 80s I have seen
movie,
it.
Predator.
Oh, yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jesse Ventura.
Yeah, just like back when movies were great. Cast like that. Governors. You had two governors in the same movie together.
One's a 9/11 truther.
Yeah.
Which is cool, but...
Back to that again. So...
Okay, DMT entity.
So Predator. There's this kind of alien with dreadlocks.
Yep.
And, I've seen some aliens with dreadlocks on DMT before. No. He's in the movie. He can turn invisible.
Yep, I remember that.
And it can kind of cloak himself where the people look and it's like this kind of like turns invisible, right? And so you think about camouflage, you think about predictive processing, and you think about beings that are in our environment that we can't see, right? So there's a connection between these three things. So the possibility is really there that I could have let's say that I want to really cloak myself from you or from other humans.
Mm-hmm.
If I came up with some kind of a device that could instill the belief in you that I wasn't here, just like the sine wave speech, where we had a device where I instilled the belief in you that it said, she irons her skirt or whatever. And like, then you could hear it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be like the reverse of that, where like I would instill the belief in you that you can't see me or that I'm not real.
Right.
And so I think that you can see me now because you have a model of me and of what humans are, what objects are, and I'm one of those things. But there could be entities in our environment that we have no model for.
Right.
We have no model for them. We have no way. And on top of that, they could have ways of tricking us, like camouflage, like some kind of a fancy camouflage that actually just skews with our perceptual beliefs to make us so that we don't form a perception of them. We actually just can't see them or can't hear them or so on. What if that system gets the system that helps us ignore them? So think of it as like we have an architecture in our brain that makes us ignore certain things.
Mm-hmm.
They exploit it. They have a technology that exploits it. Or their skin just exploits it, just like a frog's skin.
Right. It's just by their nature.
No different.
Right.
It exploits our perception. So this is a great way of illustrating it. The frog is on the log. The frog turns the color of the log. Yeah. You look at the log, you see a log. You don't see a frog.
Mm-hmm.
The frog tries to make you see log, but not frog.
Right.
And so somehow it has this way of manipulating your filling in. Your brain fills in the log as a solid log.
Mm-hmm.
And the frog manipulates that by changing the color of the log. Now you don't see the frog. What if our environment is filled with beings right now who are manipulating us in a camouflage? They're using a crypsis that exploits our predictive processing of our brain that fills in our environment for us, right? Because I mean, right now you're filling in this whole room,
Yep.
right? There's like a big gap that you can't see because you have two eyes, but you don't see a big freaking gap in front of your face,
Right. I don't see, heat signatures or microwaves or radiation.
Yeah, and there's even things like
bacteria or
there's a doorway behind you, and you're kind of filling that in your conceptual map of what's
Right.
there. And so these beings, this is my hypothetical thing. Now, don't go playing this podcast and saying like Link thinks that there's all kinds of
right.
invisible advanced crypsis beings.
We're
that
just
are
having fun
exploiting
with
our
ideas
predictive
here.
Processing. But the idea is that a drug could actually unmask them. Because if you have these beliefs that they're exploiting so that you ignore them, if the ignoring system gets disrupted, oh shit, then they appear. So a lot of people use predictive processing as a way of explaining how your brain is just creating all of these beings. Like, oh, look, it's just your top-down belief system is just going haywire and you're sort of dreaming or imagining things and it's spilling out into your perception of reality. I tend to think that. I tend to think that a lot of most psychedelic experiences, activity, if you're seeing things in the world, that it's actually that your brain is generating, your experience of the world in a way that it's generating things that aren't actually there. But on this analogy, it could actually be ignoring things. In your normal state, it's ignoring things that are actually there. In your psychedelic state, it's the ignoring hardware has been disabled, and now you're seeing things that are actually there. And so that's the debate between like the reducing valve and you're just hallucinating. And
I mean, I think either way, it's I think there's a tendency to feel like if it's your brain is creating it, that means it's like less interesting or something.
Right.
But it's like our brain is also in a way creating everything we're experiencing right now.
Yeah.
So
for sure. So
it's kind of a toss-up, like, well, is it one or the other, or is it just both, or is it just something that we have no way of even comprehending what it is?
Exactly. And it's like, who's got the fucking yardstick that's going to tell me what's real? When I look at this thing here, this should be as plain as day, that these things should be the same color. Sorry, we're on the radio or whatever, but
sure.
Pointing to a visual thing. But, and here you are, and you can't, if you can't figure out two plotches of color, which one's right?
How do you expect to?
How the hell do you know what anything is real?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's actually, this is part of my work in philosophy, that in my master's thesis that I haven't finished, that I'm really trying to finish really hard right now, which is like, if you've got a theory of perception where all perception is this convenient hallucination, and there is no real perception of reality, then like, shit, how do we have any theory of what's real?
Mm-hmm.
And now you're just going to go down this toilet of like relativism where like, oh, I might as well just, my dream, I dreamt that there was a huge banana and it unpeeled itself and it was President Trump and that was real, like.
Right. So that's where I get more attracted to just like forgetting about what's real and not real, and more so just like this idea that we're kind of in like a training ground or like a school.
Yeah.
And that anything that you experience is like a reflection of like something about yourself.
Yeah.
Or like what you need to learn, or so like things that
Sure.
upset you, or anything that you like are desiring for or like averse against, which is like a Buddhism idea.
Sure.
It's like aversion or attachment. So like if you're super attached to something and you're afraid to let it go and you can't accept that it's being let go or whatever, or if you're super averse, like something's happening to you and you can't accept that it's happening, some shitty driver in traffic.
Right.
And you're just
Bothering
losing
you.
it, just
Yeah.
road rage. And so it's like, yeah, but then it also works to like dreams. You can do the same thing, using symbolism in dreams or psychedelics.
Right.
I feel like,
the content of your trip.
yeah, exactly. And sometimes to me, that's just like, so far anyways, where I'm at in life is like, it seems like one of the only things that I can actually like make sense of, and also seems to have a direct impact on your life. Like when you get an insight to like, oh, maybe that thing I saw in my dream, like it feels like I could contextualize it in this way that's like telling me something about myself that maybe I could tweak. And then, now I have a better relationship with so-and-so, or...
Yeah, it seems like your approach is like, I'm not really going to try to care about what's real and what's not real. But one thing that kind of I noticed there is that you treat yourself as real. You treat yourself, but so this is like a
Sure.
Descartes thing, a philosophy, like I think therefore I am. Like I can doubt everything about my perceptions. I can doubt all of my emotions. I can doubt, anything about reality, but it's hard for me to doubt that I exist.
Yeah, and I would say it has nothing to do with thinking. It's more so just like, well, I'm here, or it's like there is an experience that I'm observing.
There is an experience.
I don't, persisting. And that's the thing is, I don't necessarily feel like my personality is necessarily thing. It's more so just like I'm having I'm observing a phenomenon around me. So
right, and so it doesn't matter what the ontological status or the epistemological status of those entities that you're perceiving are. It doesn't matter if it's a dream or a trip or hallucination or an illusion or reality, whatever the hell that's going to mean.
Right.
You're just like, let's not worry about its status in truth, and let's try to just interpret it in terms of what it means for the center of the world for you, which is you. I think that's good. I mean, I think as a life philosophy, that's probably a lot less frustrating than trying to figure out what's real and what's not and what things mean and what they don't.
I've certainly, experienced some major, non-ignorable impact in my life from just viewing things in that way. But that being said, I mean, this type of work of trying to figure out how things are working and why things are happening, it does play such a huge role, not only in just helping people understand like the world around them more, but also it can be really powerful for, especially in our day and age, just helping people accept or come to certain ideas that I might explain in some sort of, more sensational way, or just like a vague way, or something that sounds kind of like some Eastern mysticism or something, where people in our culture at this period of time don't resonate quite as much with mystic sayings and stuff. Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
So it's almost like just what are we in the 21st century?
Something like that.
It's like a 21st century mysticism of sorts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's just a different language to describe.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, I think it is important to have that. And just like on that note, I have a goal and an approach to get the language of psychedelic experiences into a non-spiritual language. I don't want to in any way reduce the significance of spiritual interpretations of psychedelic experiences or of the spiritual experiences themselves. I feel strongly that the experiences themselves, apart from any language to describe them, are powerful, meaningful and significant things. I think that the language around psychedelic experiences, when it is religious / mystical / spiritual, it alienates a lot of people, and it actually keeps the psychedelics out of the mainstream, and it reinforces a lot of taboo, it reinforces a lot of stigma, it reinforces a lot of bias around what psychedelics are, what they do. And it also, I think, kind of prevents progress in articulating the experiences themselves. It's sort of a default to just be able to talk about the experiences within the framework of spiritual terminology, because that's the tools we have. But those tools might not be the best.
Yeah, I think people have been primed or have certain beliefs about spirituality. Even the word like spirit. I was just having a conversation with somebody about that the other day, and like most people, when they hear the word spirit, like a plant spirit or something, they immediately think of this, magical idea of like this non-human entity or something.
Yeah. Right.
But,
supernatural.
But then if you think about the word spirit and how it can be used in other ways, like I wore a shirt in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day. You're just saying like it's in the feel, or it's in the
school
the
spirit
vibe, the signature. Yeah. So I think words, I think it's important, like what you're saying, because it just helps access a lot more people.
Yeah.
That like just maybe aren't there yet, where they hear word spirit, like the word spirit, and they're just going to shut off. They're just going to stop listening.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the factor of alienating people, and especially in the scientific, medical, and academic communities. I mean, by all, like, dear God, don't bring a whole religious mystical framework in to try to like convince people that something is like of that group, academic science or academics in general. Don't try to convince them that something's legit by like saying that it's a plant spirit molecule or something like that. It just, the terminology turns people off, even though it might capture something important that the scientific terminology doesn't yet have. Like that, I'm acknowledging that. Second thing I wanted to say though is the terminology itself might be limiting, like the spirit terminology is still kind of vague.
Yes.
And it lacks a precision that will prevent us from advancing in the detail and richness of our knowledge because, for one, we might all have a different idea of what a spirit is, and we might all have a different idea of some of these religious terminology and systems and mystical kinds of things. And so when you, like my project of trying to bring psychedelics and descriptions, especially descriptions of psychedelic experiences, away from that framework, that's kind of what my motivation is both for greater legitimacy and for greater accuracy and precision.
Honestly, it's kind of comforting too, in a way.
Sure.
In a certain type of way.
Sure.
Because it makes you realize, like, okay, like, there's still going to be all sorts of metaphysical or spiritual or archetypical or, you know, these grandiose kind of feelings and images. But you kind of, it helps to know, like, it's a biological experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, just like with anxiety, that same thing has helped me a lot. Where, like, if you get yourself into an intense anxiety state or even a panic attack, like, it is a psychedelic type of a feeling. I mean, it really does just break down, like, your sense of reality. And so you're still going to have that even if you understand what it is. But understanding what it is helps you accept it and relax into it.
Sure.
And that just sort of, like, it does transform it in a certain way. Where, like, even with psychedelics, if you're going to fight against it, it's going to be a lot more probably wild and hard to manage, where when you relax into something, it usually seems to maybe make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, and I think that your point about having it be, like, less mysterious is really important because, you know, think about, like, you're going into this big experience and you have this pretext or this belief that, like, you're going into the spirit world and you're gonna be interacting with supernatural entities in there. Well, for one, the spirit world is mysterious to you. You don't have any experience in the spirit world. You don't know what that is.
It's not from
it's
our
like,
lineage.
Boy, you're playing with magic. Don't be playing with magic. You don't understand that. You know, like, that's. I don't know where that voice come from again, but it's kind of like that's the voice that you'd say to yourself, like, like, oh, I'm getting into some scary territory here. I'm getting into the unknown. This could be dangerous for me. Whereas, like, when you think of it as a little more of, like, okay, I'm altering the neural mechanisms of my belief systems. That's a little different from, it's like you say, maybe a little more reassuring and maybe a little, like, less. I don't think that experience is going to be less intense. It's just that it's going to be less of that feeling of, like, I'm messing with something I don't understand.
Well, and maybe that's our, you know, because I feel like how you described the scientific research and how there's, like, it operates under paradigms, right? So I feel like the whole spirit world and all those mystical terminology and language, that is like its own paradigm.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's great in its own way, but we're not from that paradigm.
Right.
And so that's why, like, some of us relate to it, some of us don't. Even the people who relate to it, though, I think do understand that it's not necessarily super applicable to our time period. And so the scientific paradigm of psychedelics, a materialistic sort of reductionist,
right?
Well, I know that it lacks certain things. I do feel like it is an important step towards whatever our next paradigm is going to be, because I feel more like the reductionist materialistic is sort of like a middle ground state.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not the state that we're moving towards it, or I mean, it's part of it. You know, I think there's going to be some type of materialistic reductionist kind of like framework, but I think the whole, like, unknowable, mysterious, metaphysical, mystical aspect is going to be sort of re-injected into it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because I really think that I'm of two minds on this. I don't want to be seen as someone who's like this reductionist neuroscientist who's going to, like, explain all of these magical experiences in terms of neurons and neurochemicals.
Sure.
I actually think that psychedelics, I think the approach is absolutely, the neuroscience approach is absolutely the right approach to understanding psychedelics. And the language of neuroscience is what we should try to use to understand psychedelics, but I actually don't think it can. But I think we should still try to use it. Because what that's going to do is it's going to expand the language of neuroscience to include concepts that can accommodate it. And this is what you described, so that it's going to bring, and this has been my longtime dream, 20 years now, to bring science, like material science of biology, science of physics, the science of brains, to bring it into a place where it is comfortable with what you would call subjective experience, mental phenomena, consciousness, quote unquote, and matter. And so I think that eventually when you try to explain psychedelics using biology, neurobiology, neuroscience, cognitive science, kinds of amalgams, that you'll get a framework that doesn't quite explain it, but that you'll be forced to transform our concept of what a molecule is and what matter is in relation to what mind is, and how mind can be a molecule, and how a molecule can be mind, and not just a molecule, but a system of molecules.
Right.
How can it be a mind? How can it be a molecule? And that's what I want. I want to see science go there. It's like my ultimate thing is I want to see science at a place where there's no more division between
an integration,
mind and matter, or between a mental thing and a physical thing. And I think that to fully understand psychedelics, we will have to get there.
Yeah.
And I think that by making a valiant effort to understand psychedelics with brain science, that brain science is going to transform to get to a point where mind and matter are understood. And I think psychedelics are unique in their ability to do that, to push science to get there. And they're unique in the ability to make progress on the relationship between mind and matter. I mean, just think in very simple terms. I eat a mushroom, it goes into my body, and then my mind becomes different. Like, that is, if you can explain fully how that works with your scientific framework, then your scientific framework is going to solve the mind-body problem. Or at least dissolve it, which is what we hope happens. We hope that the mind-body problem, or the mind and matter thing, is dissolved. And I don't want to see any longer. Right now we've got this idea of matter that doesn't account for consciousness. I don't want to see that anymore. I want to see a theory of matter and a theory of consciousness where they're not opposed to each other.
Right.
And I think that psychedelics can really get us there.
Kind of takes away the question of, does the mind create consciousness, or is the mind an antenna that receives consciousness, or can tune into consciousness? It's like, it's a paradoxical thing, but I'm always led to this feeling of like, well, maybe it's kind of both.
Yeah, sure. Both. Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to say, back to the DMT.
Yes, let's get back to the
entities,
DMT entities.
Because what you were just saying, so I don't know. This is just a random theory I have no basis of, and I don't even necessarily believe that it's true, or I'm inclined to believe it's true, but there's just something about it I like. So kind of what you were just talking about with cells, and how a group of cells could have mind, and then into the idea of these potential entities that we could not be able to perceive.
Right.
So with all the new information that comes out about bacteria and fungus, like I've gotten really into these ideas about like, well, okay, so we have all these opposing forces of billions of little tiny things inside of us that we can't see.
Right.
I guess the only reason I believe it is because science tells me it's true.
Yeah.
but I'm inclined to believe that it is true. But they influence our thoughts, our behaviors, our cravings, all this stuff. More and more they're finding, like, associating it with schizophrenia, different dysbiosis problems. So I'm inclined to think or imagine in this as above, so below, or that anything in the interior has a reflection of the exterior. So I think about if there is this, maybe inner dimension is the wrong way to put it, because if you believe DMT is just a whole nother reality that's around us right now. But part of me wonders if some of these entities, which people might have considered like angels and demons or various different types of DMT entities, could be the collective consciousness of like hives of bacteria.
Sure.
And that there are benevolent and malevolent, as far as we're concerned, as humans, for survival and just emotional regulation and all this stuff, that are sort of at war inside of us all the time, trying to influence us in either positive or negative ways. Kind of a wild theory, but and it's not
I don't think it's that wild,
and it doesn't even necessarily have to be, the DMT entities could be something totally different, but I think maybe it's not that wild. Just
that there could be a voice of, or like that you could encounter an intelligence that actually what you've encountered is the intelligence of some kind of fungus or bacteria.
Yeah, like the collective of intelligence. Because why would hive of billions of certain types of bacteria inside of you that can influence your thoughts and your emotions, like, not have some sort of collective type of energy that could be felt or maybe even experienced or communicated with in some way.
Sure.
And that the bacteria could be affected by certain things you eat or certain thoughts or emotions, because that influences your biochemical composition as far as like acidity or whatever. But then also it could go in the reverse of that, where like if the biological manifestation of these energies are as what I just stated, if the bacteria are like a manifestation of certain like archetypical energies, for example, because we're on such like a microscopic level, like if bacteria that are beneficial for us could be considered this sort of like a positive energy, then maybe some of the energy work and healing that's done in like a psychedelic state is literally sort of like transforming your energetics, which is then manifesting in different types of microbiota. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. It could be. I mean, it would be interesting to try to think of a way to test it. And I don't know enough about microbiology to really, but it makes me think of this fungus that was discovered last year that attacks its host. Is it grasshoppers? I felt like it attacked some kind of an insect. It took control of the insect's body by producing neurochemicals, made the insect have sex like crazy, and some of the neurochemicals that the fungus produce, psilocybin.
Whoa.
And it was a discovery that a new psilocybin producing thing, because before it was like psilocybe mushrooms and Pinaleus and a few other genus of mushroom, and that was it that we knew about for psilocybin producing animals in nature or fungi.
Yep.
And this is a different kind of fungus. It's not like a mushroom kind of fungus, and I don't know enough about fungi to really know the difference. But Jamie, look it up.
Pull that up.
But it was legit, and I think it was in Oregon or something. They found it, and it takes control of the host, manipulates its brain with psychedelic drugs, and makes it all horny, and it changes like dopamine. It makes, it was like psilocybin and then some kind of like amphetamine like dopamine thing. Makes it all energetic and cruising all around and whatever. Yeah, and just think of all the ways that, that our brains could be influenced by, organisms that aren't us. And
exactly.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to think about personal identity when you feel in a trip or not, but when you feel like you're not yourself or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's all these goddamn viruses and bacteria, maybe you're not yourself.
Well, exactly. When you start adding it up, it's like how much of us is water, how much of us is bacteria, fungus, parasites,
Yeah.
So it's like, where are you?
Well,
which part is you?
And also, if you think about like all the stuff that I talked about at the beginning of our talk, like the brain architecture is this network of beliefs about beliefs and expectation and prior knowledge, and that is exploitable by certain contexts, and that animals exploit that through crypsis and camouflage and mimicry and so on. That maybe it's not just snakes and frogs and whatever that mimic or that exploit our brains' beliefs, but microorganisms.
Yeah.
Where they know that if they create, and if it's just a small molecule like psilocybin, and then that throws all these beliefs off, that could be just like a part of nature. And in fact, the reason why psilocybin is in the mushroom, or why DMT is in the toad, or in the plants, could be so that it can disrupt the belief storage in different organisms.
Right.
Another related thing, thinking about nature, squirrels and deer and bear, they'll eat psilocybin mushrooms, like on purpose.
Yeah.
And, it incapacitates them and makes them vulnerable while they are tripping.
Mm-hmm.
So why do they do it? Like if you think about just from a strict
right, what's the evolutionary advantage?
Yeah. But when it makes perfect sense, we start thinking about this belief structure and how prior knowledge can actually limit you from seeing things in your environment. Let's say that I'm a squirrel and I'm like every day I'm foraging and I'm like walking past a bunch of food that I don't see because I've got like some predictive processing blinders on that are like telling me like, nah, won't be nothing over there. Like,
yeah.
And I just miss it all the time. And then one day I take a bunch of mushrooms and I have a crazy trip and I come back from the trip and my belief system or my belief storage, my network of prior knowledge is settling and it's still fluid and malleable. And I walk past that thing. Hey, there's a bunch of acorns right here or whatever. And this happens even just to people. I remember, speaking of like the New Age circuit, I read Tom Wolfe? No, who's the Chaga guy? The guy who wrote all the Chaga books. Anyway,
I don't know.
There's this guy who wrote this book on, I think it's Wolfe is the name, but wrote these books on Chaga and stuff. And he's like, I lived at my house for 10 years. I was all into Chaga, wrote books on it and whatever. One day, walking in my yard, and I find a bunch of Chaga just on my property, these birch trees that I didn't even know the birch trees were there. And that's like, so I think that animals might actually seek psychedelic states for an evolutionary advantage, that it helps them to overcome the perceptual ignoring system that they have. And that they actually might, and that ties in with creativity as well. Creativity, problem solving, and then finding affordances in your environment.
Well, and if, the natural environment is constantly changing, their structures, their predictive processing might be super effective at a certain time when the climate is a certain way, and then so that produces certain types of food but then as things start to shift, like they need to shift with it. They need to find a way to adapt.
Bingo. Yeah. And yes, because their architecture might serve them really well in that environment. But then, like you say, when the environment changes, they're still using the same architecture, the same brain system.
It's like updating an app to work with a new operating system or something.
It has to update. And it could be that by like shaking it up with psychedelics, like you could really update it.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It was great.
Great.
We could go a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
There's plenty of crazy stuff, so we'll do some more, and we'll get into some more fun, wild, and interesting ideas.
We'll come back to the DMT entities, and then we'll start talking about 9/11 truth next time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
All right, Link Swanson, everybody.
You can go to swanson.link.
There you go, swanson.link.
Just
How easy is that?
Type it in your browser, swanson.link. You'll get there.
Thank you for listening to Awake, Aware, Alive. I am Jacob Gossel, Gossel. If you want to help support this podcast, check out patreon.com/Jacob Gossel. I'll give you early access to these podcasts right after they're recorded. I will also give you access to unreleased music, like the stuff you're hearing right now. And I will also give you extra stuff.